You Chinese? You will reply, you see, yes, my father Chinese, but I'm Mozambican.
Beneath the great tomb of China's first emperor, hidden bones and ancient secrets are whispering a story we never expected. Scientists studied the DNA, but when AI joined the search, the results shocked everyone. Could the emperor's bloodline reveal lost truths about power, history, and identity? Join us as we uncover the details of this mysterious discovery. Secrets written in blood. For over 2,000 years, the resting place of Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor, has remained shrouded in secrecy. His massive mausoleum near Mount Li has always been treated with near religious reverence, and its central chamber has never been breached. Official policy strictly forbids disturbing the sealed tomb, which has allowed legends and mysteries to grow around it. That is why the sudden emergence of new scientific findings linked to his genetic ancestry came as such a stunning revelation. The breakthrough did not come from entering the emperor's burial mound, but from studying the relics surrounding it. Archaeologists working in the outer pits recovered weapons, ornaments, and artifacts buried with his army and court. Many of these objects had been sealed away for centuries, shielded from outside contamination. On the surface of some bronze swords, arrowheads, and ornamental pieces, researchers found microscopic traces of organic matter, tiny residues left behind by human contact thousands of years ago. With the development of advanced DNA recovery techniques designed for ancient and degraded samples, these faint remnants were carefully analyzed. To the astonishment of the scientists, fragments of genetic material emerged that appeared to be linked directly to the emperor's paternal line. This discovery hinted that Qin Shi Huang had left behind more than just monuments of stone and clay. His biological imprint still lingered on the objects once carried or commissioned during his reign. The real shock came when researchers compared the sequences with known genetic markers. Instead of pointing only to the early Han Chinese populations of the Central Plains, which most historians expected, the results revealed surprising links. Some of the markers suggested ancestry stretching beyond the heartland of China, reaching towards Central Asia, where nomadic tribes once roamed the steppes. These groups often clashed with Chinese states, but also exchanged goods, ideas, and technologies. This revelation carried profound implications. Qin Shi Huang has always been remembered as the ultimate unifier, the ruler who forged one nation from a collection of warring states. His very identity symbolized the creation of China as a single cultural and political entity. Yet if his bloodline carried traces of ancestry beyond those borders, it meant that the roots of China's first emperor were more complex than the traditional story suggested. Rather than representing a purely local lineage, his heritage may have reflected the broader flows of people across Asia. Such a finding reshapes the way history is viewed. Long before the emperor's rise, Chinese states had constant contact with steppe nomads through trade, conflict, and diplomacy. Horses, metallurgy, and even cultural practices passed back and forth. It is not unthinkable that a ruling family might carry genetic signatures of these interactions. But for those markers to belong to the man who defined Chinese imperial identity is both startling and thought-provoking. The discovery remains controversial. Without a complete genome, it is difficult to say with certainty what Qin Shi Huang's ancestry looked like in full detail. Some experts caution that contamination, sample degradation, or mistakes in attribution could explain the unexpected results. Others argue that only a direct study of the unopened tomb will settle the question once and for all. Yet even with these uncertainties, the findings add new depth to the emperor's story. He may not have been just the child of one land, but the descendant of a wider, interconnected world. But if Qin Shi Huang's DNA reshaped how we see his origins, his monuments reveal how he wanted to be remembered. Beyond bloodlines, he carved his legacy into stone, clay, and earth on a scale the ancient world had never seen, building eternity with his reign. When Qin Shi Huang rose to power in 221 BC, he achieved what countless rulers before him had failed to do. He unified the fractured warring states of China under one banner. Proclaiming himself the first emperor, he began a reign that lasted little more than a decade. Yet in those brief years, he transformed the cultural, political, and physical landscape so profoundly that the echoes of his rule continue to be felt even today. Qin understood that power was not only about armies and conquest, but also about symbols that could endure across generations. He sought to standardize every aspect of life across his vast territories. Weights, measures, and coins were made uniform, ensuring that trade flowed smoothly. A single written script replaced regional variations, allowing communication and law to be consistent from one end of the empire to the other. These reforms made his authority not just visible, but practical, uniting millions under a shared system. Yet Qin was not content with mere governance. He wanted his empire to leave a physical mark on the earth, projects so massive that they would remind future generations of his strength. Among the greatest of these undertakings was the early form of the Great Wall. He ordered existing regional barriers to be linked together, creating a defensive structure stretching for hundreds of miles. Though later dynasties would expand and rebuild it, Qin's vision laid the foundation for one of the most iconic human-made structures in history. The emperor also built extensive road networks, some stretching thousands of miles. These roads allowed his armies to move swiftly and ensured that trade and communication remained under imperial control. Canals were dug to improve irrigation and transportation, showing his ability to blend practicality with ambition. Each of these projects was a reminder of his authority, demonstrating that the empire could marshal resources and labor on a scale that seemed almost limitless. Nowhere, however, is Qin's vision more visible than in his enormous burial complex near Mount Li. Construction began while he was still king of the Qin state, years before he claimed the title of emperor. Over time, the project grew to an unprecedented size, reportedly involving hundreds of thousands of laborers. The mausoleum covered more than 20 square miles, with a central mound towering like a pyramid above the landscape. Within its walls, palaces, offices, stables, and armories were recreated in miniature, as if the emperor intended to carry his kingdom into eternity. The most breathtaking discovery from this site came in 1974, when farmers digging a well stumbled upon the terracotta army. Thousands of life-sized clay soldiers stood in formation, guarding the tomb in silence. Each face was unique, as if modeled after real individuals, and traces of paint suggested that they were once brightly decorated. Alongside the soldiers stood horses, chariots, and weapons, creating a vision of an eternal army ready to serve their emperor even in death. This attention to detail reflected Qin's obsession with order and control. Artisans, sculptors, and metalworkers were organized on a scale never before seen, producing thousands of pieces with precision. The result was both awe-inspiring and intimidating, a reminder of the emperor's unmatched command over resources and people. Despite decades of research, the central tomb remains unopened. Ancient texts claim it was filled with rivers of mercury and treasures beyond measure, protected by elaborate traps. Modern soil tests around the mound have revealed unusually high mercury levels, giving weight to these old accounts. Yet the core of the mausoleum lies undisturbed, preserving its secrets as one of archaeology's most tantalizing mysteries. Qin Shi Huang's life was short, and his dynasty collapsed soon after his death in 210 BC. But the framework he established, the idea of a unified empire led by an emperor, endured for over 2,000 years. So what brought this to the present day? Traces of the forgotten builders. In 2003, archaeologists working near the burial complex of Qin Shi Huang stumbled upon a discovery that shed new light on the emperor's great project. While most excavations around the site focused on the terracotta warriors and monumental structures, this particular dig revealed something far more human. Scattered near the outer pits were skeletal remains, bones belonging not to noble families or honored soldiers, but to the laborers who had built the mausoleum itself. For centuries, historical texts had hinted at the harsh conditions endured by these workers. Accounts describe thousands being drafted into service, often never returning to their homes. Many were peasants pulled from their fields, others were prisoners of war taken during the emperor's campaigns, and some may have been conscripted craftsmen. Records suggested that exhaustion, hunger, and even execution claimed countless lives during construction. Yet until the early 2000s, such claims rested largely on written tradition. The skeletal remains provided physical evidence of the immense human toll behind the creation of one of history's greatest monuments. What made the discovery even more important was the opportunity for scientific testing. Researchers collected mitochondrial DNA from 19 of the skeletons. Unlike other genetic material, mitochondrial DNA survives longer in ancient remains and is inherited solely through the maternal line, making it easier to trace ancestry. The results painted a striking picture. Among these 19 individuals, scientists identified 16 distinct maternal lineages. This level of genetic diversity revealed that the workforce had not come from a single community or region. Some genetic markers matched populations in northern China, others connected with groups in the south, and at least one bore close resemblance to lineages found in Japan. This meant that the mausoleum's workforce was drawn from across East Asia, a collection of people brought together under imperial command for a single monumental task. The implications were profound. Instead of being a local project relying only on nearby peasants, the construction of Qin Shi Huang's tomb was an empire-wide effort. Prisoners captured from conquered territories may have been forced into service. Farmers from distant provinces could have been drafted into grueling labor. Perhaps even individuals from across the sea or regions with little direct contact were absorbed into the emperor's workforce. The sheer diversity in their DNA reflected the sweeping reach of Qin authority at the time. Beyond the genetic evidence, the bones themselves told their own story. Many showed signs of stress fractures, worn joints, and malnutrition. These were clear markers of relentless labor under poor conditions. Few personal items were found buried with them, suggesting that they were not given respectful burials, but instead discarded after death, possibly in mass graves. Their lives had been consumed in service to the emperor, and their deaths recorded only in the silent testimony of their bones. One of the most intriguing details was the possible genetic connection to Japan. Official historical records note contact between China and the Japanese archipelago centuries later, but this finding hinted at earlier links. Some scholars suggested that these lineages reflected prehistoric population movements across East Asia, while others argued it could be coincidence, with similar genetic traits emerging independently. Regardless of the explanation, it deepened the mystery of how far-reaching Qin Shi Huang's influence and connections may have been. The discovery also reinforced a larger truth about the Qin dynasty. The empire was not built by the emperor alone, nor even by his generals. It was constructed on the backs of countless ordinary people, many of whom were uprooted from their lives and forced into years of toil. Their sacrifice made the emperor's vision possible, yet their names were never recorded, their stories lost, until science began to recover them. Not everyone accepted the findings without question. Critics pointed out that 19 skeletons were too few to represent the entire workforce. Others emphasized that mitochondrial DNA reveals only maternal ancestry, leaving the paternal side unknown. These limitations meant that the conclusions were more suggestive than absolute. Even so, the evidence was enough to illustrate that the mausoleum's builders came from a wide range of backgrounds, united by the command of a ruler whose powers stretched across the continent. The skeletons revealed who built the mausoleum, but the tomb itself still hides its greatest mysteries. Beneath its grassy mound lies a sealed chamber said to hold rivers of mercury, treasures beyond imagination, and traps waiting after 2,000 years. Secrets beneath the mound. Rising over 250 feet above the plains of Shanxi province, the burial mound of Qin Shi Huang looks like an ordinary hill shaped by time and weather. Covered in trees, it blends into the landscape, appearing more like nature than design. Yet beneath its slopes lies one of the most carefully sealed chambers in human history, a tomb untouched since the day it was closed more than 2 millennia ago. For decades, archaeologists have explored the surrounding pits, unearthing the terracotta warriors, chariots, and countless artifacts. But the central vault itself has never been opened. It remains locked in soil and secrecy, shielded not only by earth, but also by official policy that forbids disturbing it. What little is known about its interior comes from ancient texts, especially the writings of Sima Qian, a Han Dynasty historian who lived about a century after the emperor's death. According to his accounts, the burial chamber was designed as a miniature version of the empire. The ceiling was painted with stars to resemble the heavens, while the floor was said to contain maps of the land. Most astonishing of all, trenches filled with liquid mercury were described as representing rivers and seas flowing eternally through the underground kingdom. For centuries, many dismissed these descriptions as exaggeration, but modern soil tests around the mound revealed mercury levels far above normal, some dozens of times higher than the natural background. These findings suggested that the historian's words may have reflected reality. The presence of mercury, however, brings danger. Highly toxic, it could make opening the chamber hazardous for researchers, threatening both human health and the preservation of artifacts. This is one reason the tomb remains sealed. Another is the possibility of ancient defenses. Some records describe hidden traps, crossbows rigged to fire automatically at intruders. Though no modern evidence confirms this, the idea alone creates caution. Excavating through layers of soil while avoiding potential booby traps would be risky even with advanced technology. Preservation adds yet another challenge. When the terracotta warriors were first uncovered in 1974, they were found covered in bright pigments. But within minutes of exposure to air, the colors flaked away, leaving the figures in plain clay. If murals, fabrics, or painted objects exist inside the tomb, exposure could destroy them instantly. Until conservation technology improves enough to prevent such loss, archaeologists prefer to wait, protecting the chamber as it is rather than risking irreversible damage. Environmental concerns complicate matters further. The mound sits in a region where groundwater movement could destabilize the site. Excavation with modern machinery might cause collapses or compromise the tomb's structure. While some engineers have proposed drilling small cores to peek inside, heritage authorities generally reject the idea. Even the smallest puncture could allow air or moisture to enter, potentially damaging what has been sealed for over 2,000 years. Reactions to a discovery that shook history. The suggestion that DNA evidence could be traced back to one of China's first emperors set off a wave of fascination and debate across many fields. What began as a quiet scientific finding quickly became a topic of national interest. Historians, politicians, and researchers all found themselves drawn into the story. Once early reports mentioned the name of a ruling dynasty. The idea that fragments of genetic material might connect directly to such a powerful figure from ancient times made the discovery both sensitive and deeply intriguing. For some, the news sparked excitement about the possibility of unlocking secrets buried for over 2,000 years. Yet at the same time, many experts urged caution. Geneticists explained that biological material usually breaks down over long centuries, making it extremely difficult to gather clear results. Still, there was an important detail that made this case different. Imperial tombs were often constructed with remarkable care, using preservation methods far ahead of their time. Chambers were sealed tightly, containers were coated with lacquer, and burial practices were designed to minimize contact with air. These factors meant that traces of organic material could survive much longer than expected, adding credibility to the findings. But science was not the only part of the story. The political dimension soon overshadowed the laboratory debates. In a country like China, where history forms the foundation of cultural identity, even the possibility of a genetic link to an emperor carried heavy implications. If proven true, it could challenge long-accepted views about how dynasties rose and fell. Questions of legitimacy, succession, and cultural heritage suddenly moved to the forefront, making the discovery far more than just a scientific curiosity. Adding to the intrigue were whispers about how the results had first surfaced. Reports suggested that a private team of researchers, working outside strict government supervision, had managed to conduct the earliest tests. According to these accounts, their findings were later handed over to officials, which might explain why the story appeared in fragments instead of through a formal declaration. This transition from private research to official handling may also have sparked tensions between scientists eager to publish and authorities determined to control the narrative. Historians who examined the claims recognized both the potential and the risks. They noted that if the evidence was genuine, it would mark one of the most extraordinary recoveries in modern history. At the same time, they understood that such a revelation could reshape not just scholarship, but also the way a nation remembers and defends its past. The lost bloodlines. For centuries, the story of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, has been told as that of a ruler who stood alone, a man who rose from the chaos of the warring states to create something entirely new. His image has been that of a singular figure, untouched by outside influence, the living embodiment of the nation he unified. But now, with whispers of DNA evidence pointing toward foreign ancestry, a new question rises. What happened to his bloodline? Did it vanish with him? Or has it lived on quietly for over 2 millennia? The official histories are frustratingly vague on this matter. Ancient chronicles recorded his conquests, his building projects, his reforms, and even his legendary tomb. Yet when it comes to family, the details are scarce. Qin Shi Huang is known to have had numerous consorts and concubines, and some texts mention children. But the records are incomplete, many of them lost or deliberately destroyed after his dynasty collapsed in 206 BC, barely a few years after his death. The Han dynasty, which succeeded the Qin, had little interest in preserving the legacy of the man they replaced. Instead, they portrayed him as a tyrant, a despot who burned books, buried scholars, and ruled with fear. In such retellings, the question of his descendants faded into obscurity. Yet bloodlines rarely vanish so easily. If Qin Shi Huang's DNA truly carried links beyond the central plains of China, then his offspring might have spread not only across Chinese territory, but potentially beyond its borders. Imagine for a moment that his children, whether legitimate heirs or not, mingled with local populations, carrying fragments of his genetic signature far and wide. The collapse of the Qin dynasty would not have erased those lineages. It would only have scattered them. Historians have long speculated that when the Han forces overthrew the Qin court, many members of the imperial family fled. Some may have been executed to eliminate rivals, but others could have gone into hiding, blending into remote provinces. Families in western China, for example, have preserved oral traditions claiming descent from royal figures of the Qin period. Until now, such claims were often dismissed as legend. But with modern genetics entering the picture, these old family stories suddenly take on a sharper edge. What if some of them are true? One of the most fascinating theories revolves around the western frontier, the region that borders what we now call Central Asia. This was the edge of the Qin Empire, where nomadic tribes roamed and trade routes were beginning to form. If Qin Shi Huang's ancestors carried Central Asian markers, as the DNA evidence suggests, then perhaps his descendants also moved in that direction after his death. Some scholars believe the intermingling of populations in the Silk Road corridor might hold hidden traces of his lineage. In genetic studies of modern communities along this belt, there are occasional anomalies, haplogroups that do not fit neatly into expected patterns. Could some of these belong to the bloodline of the first emperor? The idea that the descendants of Qin Shi Huang might be living among ordinary families today is both thrilling and unsettling. Imagine being a farmer, a teacher, or a shopkeeper, and discovering that the DNA in your veins ties you to the most powerful man of ancient China. Genealogy companies already trade on the allure of finding royal connections in people's ancestry. If definitive proof emerges, the commercial rush to trace lines back to Qin Shi Huang would be unlike anything seen before. But with this comes another dilemma. If living descendants are identified, what would that mean in a modern world where politics, culture, and history are so closely tied? In China, where ancestry carries immense cultural weight, the revelation could be explosive. The state has long presented the first emperor as a symbol of national unity and identity. But if his living descendants were scattered across borders, or worse, if some no longer lived in China at all, it could complicate the narrative. Would those people be celebrated as heirs to an ancient legacy, or would their existence be downplayed to maintain control of the story? Even more controversial is the possibility that his bloodline may not be confined to East Asia. If Central Asian markers in his DNA are confirmed, then his ancestry, and by extension his descendants, might also reach beyond what we typically imagine as Chinese heritage. That means that somewhere in the steppes of Kazakhstan, the valleys of Mongolia, or even further west, families may unknowingly share a link to the man who called himself the first emperor. Such an idea challenges the very notion of pure lineage, forcing us to accept that history is far more interconnected than national borders suggest. The search for the lost bloodlines has already inspired speculation among scholars and amateur historians alike. Some point to noble families in later dynasties who claim descent from ancient rulers. Others suggest that only through large-scale genetic studies of regional populations will the truth ever be known. But such work is politically sensitive. Testing thousands of people in hopes of finding a link to a long-dead emperor could spark debates over identity, heritage, and even territorial claims. For now, the mystery remains. Qin Shi Huang's tomb stays sealed, his true genome still locked away beneath layers of earth and mercury. The DNA traces uncovered so far are fragmentary, tantalizing hints rather than complete proof. But if even a fraction of the findings are correct, they open up the possibility that his descendants are still among us, walking through modern cities and villages unaware of the empire that once lived in their blood. And perhaps that is the most fitting legacy of all. For while Qin Shi Huang sought to be remembered as the eternal unifier, buried with an army that would guard him forever, his true immortality may lie not in stone or clay, but in the hidden strands of DNA that continue to flow through the living world. The emotional weight of this possibility cannot be ignored. For some, it might provide a sense of pride and belonging. For others, it could stir questions about identity, heritage, and even responsibility toward preserving cultural traditions. It is no longer just about remembering emperors in books or statues. Their presence could become a living thread, woven into the identities of countless modern families. So now that scientists have made their own discoveries, does AI confirm it, or did it discover something else? Did AI technology confirm or challenge the discovery? After the first round of excitement, a new question emerged. What role did artificial intelligence play in this groundbreaking discovery? Scientists had already conducted their own tests and drawn conclusions based on the fragments of DNA that seemed to connect to the emperor's lineage. Yet in today's world, no major finding escapes the lens of AI. With its unmatched ability to analyze huge amounts of data at incredible speed, AI was soon brought in to either confirm the results or reveal something entirely different. The story began with traditional science. Geneticists used delicate techniques to extract and test the DNA, carefully comparing the sequences with known genetic markers from historical populations. Their work showed patterns that aligned with what might be expected from someone of imperial ancestry. But ancient samples are fragile, and even the most experienced scientist knows that contamination or degradation could blur the picture. That is where AI entered the scene. Artificial intelligence is not a replacement for human discovery, but it excels at detecting patterns humans might miss. Researchers fed the data into advanced algorithms trained on thousands of genetic records from across Asia. Within hours, the system highlighted matches and anomalies that would have taken months for human teams to detect. In doing so, AI confirmed several aspects of the scientists' findings, giving them more confidence that the DNA truly belonged to someone of great importance. Yet AI did more than just confirm. It also uncovered details that had not been considered. For example, subtle variations in the genetic code suggested that the lineage was not as straightforward as expected. The algorithms hinted at possible intermarriages with neighboring groups, raising the idea that the emperor's bloodline may have been more diverse than the official records claimed. This revelation could change long-held assumptions about how dynasties preserve their power and identity. The use of AI also opened the door to broader comparisons. By cross-referencing with databases around the world, the system suggested connections between the emperor's DNA and populations far outside of China's borders. These findings were not final proof, but intriguing leads, pointing to the possibility that trade, migration, or even alliances played a greater role in shaping imperial bloodlines than historians once believed. Of course, this raised tensions. Some scientists welcomed the fresh insights, while others worried that AI might be drawing connections too quickly. Unlike human experts, AI has no sense of cultural context. It only sees data. This meant that its findings had to be carefully interpreted to avoid conclusions that could distort history. Still, the fact remained, without AI, these subtle clues might have remained hidden forever. The blend of human expertise and artificial intelligence created a new kind of discovery process. Where the scientists brought care, caution, and historical understanding, AI provided scale, speed, and precision. Together, they painted a picture that was richer than either could achieve alone. So, did AI simply confirm what scientists already knew? In part, yes. It supported the claim that DNA from an emperor could indeed have survived and been identified. But it also did something more powerful. It challenged researchers to look beyond the surface, asking questions about diversity, movement, and cultural mixing in ancient dynasties. In that way, AI did not just confirm the past, it expanded it, reminding us that history is not fixed, but constantly unfolding with each new tool we create. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.